Hi, I'm Sean Armstrong. Welcome to Module 1 of this free course based on my book, Bloodstained Banner. Before we argue about anything, we need to do something very un-internet. We need to define our terms. This module is called, Before We Argue, What Do Socialism, Communism, and Capitalism Actually Mean? Because if we don't agree on the words, we're just yelling past each other. Let's start where this all really began. Online. You've seen this. Someone calls Social Security socialism. Someone else calls Sweden socialist. Then they jump straight to Stalin and gulags like it's all the same thing. In a single Facebook thread, you'll see the word socialism used for welfare programs, high taxes, Nordic social democracy, Soviet communism, and basically anything a person doesn't like. On the other side, you'll see people shout capitalism at every single bad thing that happens. Corporate greed, capitalism. Cronyism, capitalism. Government bailouts, somehow also pure capitalism. It's a mess. So in Bloodstained Banner, I want to slow everything down and say, time out. Before we fight, what do these words actually mean? That's what this module is for. For this course, we're going to use simple working definitions. Not perfect, not meant to satisfy every academic, just clear enough so we can think straight. First, capitalism. When I say capitalism in this course, I mean this: private ownership of businesses and property, voluntary exchange in markets, profit, risk, and competition. People invest, they risk their own capital, they try to make a profit. If they guess right, they win. If they guess wrong, they lose. Prices move up and down based on supply and demand. That's capitalism as we're using it here. Second, socialism. When I say socialism, I do not mean any program I like or anything with taxes. For this course, socialism means significant state ownership or control over the major means of production and resources. In other words, the state owns or tightly controls big industries. The state makes the key decisions about what gets produced, how much, and at what price. Private ownership is limited, heavily controlled or pushed into the margins. It's not just we have welfare, it's about who owns and controls the productive machinery of the economy. Third, communism. Finally, communism. When I say communism here, I mean the revolutionary project of a classless society with collective ownership, as envisioned by Marx and Engels and implemented badly by regimes like Lenin's Soviet Union and Mao's China. So in theory, no private property, no classes, everything held in common in practice, one-party states, secret police, central planning, and a very real body counts in the tens of millions. We're going to treat those regimes as real-world attempts to implement socialist and communist ideas and look at what actually happened. So why am I being so picky about a few words? Because the definitions change the scoreboard. First reason, Scandinavia. You cannot analyze Scandinavian socialism if you don't distinguish high-tax capitalism from actual socialism. If Denmark and Sweden are market economies with private property, world-famous private companies competing in global markets, then they are not examples of the state owning and running the major means of production. They're capitalist countries with big welfare states. If you call that socialism, then the word socialism stops being useful for describing things like the Soviet Union or Maoist China. So in this course, we separate Nordic social democracy and actual socialist communist regimes that tried central planning and state ownership on a massive scale. Second reason, death tolls and accountability. If you want to talk honestly about the death tolls of socialism and communism, you first have to decide which regimes count as socialist or communist. You can't say all good things are not real socialism and all bad things don't count either. At some point, you have to say these governments explicitly claimed socialist or communist ideology. They ran their economies that way. They used that language. They belong in that bucket. Once you decide that, then you can start asking, how many people died under those systems? Why did they die? Was it war, famine, purges, policy, or some mix? But if everything is socialism and nothing is socialism, you can't measure anything honestly. That's why we lock in on these working definitions right here in Module 1. So the rest of the course is not just vibes and feelings. In Bloodstained Banner, I spend a lot of time on this exact problem. The introduction walks through the social media circus. people praising socialism online without clear definitions, and scrambling when asked for a successful example. Then, Chapter 1 dives straight into the myth of Scandinavian socialism, showing why the Nordic countries are not what most online socialists want them to be. This module is your on-camera version of that. We name the problem, we fix the vocabulary, then we go look at the real-world examples. Let me give you the line that sums up this whole module. In Bloodstained Banner, I spend time nailing down these definitions so the rest of the book isn't just feelings. This module gives you the short version. The course is here to make the ideas clear and accessible. The book is where you'll find the longer essays, the historical context, the citations and references, and the deeper dives behind each concept. So now we have our working definitions. Capitalism, private ownership, markets, profit, risk, competition. Socialism, significant state ownership or control of major industries and resources. Communism, the revolutionary classless project of collective ownership as envisioned by Marx and Engels and implemented very badly by regimes like Lenin's and Mao's. With that language in place, we're ready for the first big fight of the book. Is Scandinavia actually socialist, or is that just a marketing slogan? That's Module 2 in Chapter 1. I'm Sean Armstrong. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson.